Hello, this is Brian, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the May 12th issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Shipping industry fears fuel shortages as Iran war squeezes bunker fuel supply. Ship operators rely on a sludge-like substance known as bunker fuel to keep vessels running. The Iran war's closure of the Strait of Hormuz has choked off the supply of this fuel that powers the global maritime industry and its largest refueling hub in Asia. Bunker fuel is a literal bottom of the barrel product, heavier and dirtier than the more expensive kinds of refined crude oil used by other vehicles like cars and airplanes. It sinks to the bottom of storage containers. But it helps move the 80% of globally traded goods that are transported by sea, and experts say that means a shortage of bunker fuel will translate to higher shipping costs, increase consumer prices, and hurt the bottom lines of businesses worldwide. That will be an issue first in Asia, which relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil. In Singapore, the world's biggest refueling hub for bunker fuel, reserves are dwindling and prices are spiking. Shipping companies are trying to adapt to the energy shock, reducing vessel speeds and revising schedules to cut costs in the short term while making plans to acquire ships that can run on alternative fuels. But some companies won't survive this triage for long, according to Henning Loystone of the Eurasia Group consultancy firm, who warned that the pain will spread beyond Asia through global supply chains. Southeast Asia turns to energy triage. Asia, which was hit first and hardest by the energy shock, has adopted various forms of energy triage to cope, increasing its use of coal, buying more crude oil from Russia, and reviving plans to develop nuclear power. But Asia is bracing for further impacts as energy reserves dwindle and government subsidies dry up. More than half of global seaborne trade moved through Asian ports in 2024, according to United Nations data, so what happens there will have global consequences. For now, Singapore supplies bunker fuel have held up even as the price races up. But the prolonged cutoff from major sources of the heavier crude oil needed for bunker fuel, like Iraq and Kuwait, will cause shortages, said Natalia Katona of the commodity site Oil Price. We just see the price in Singapore going up, Katona said. Before the war, bunker fuel in Singapore cost about $500 per metric ton, or $450 per U.S. ton. That went up to more than $800 or $725 per U.S. ton as of early May. Fuel shortages drive consumer costs. Shipping companies are absorbing the brunt of the costs for now, said June Goh, an oil analyst for market intelligence firm Sparta Commodities, but this may soon pass on to the customers. The daily cost of the Iran war for the global shipping industry is nearly $400 million, according to the European Federation for Transport and Environment. Bunker fuel shortages tend to feed through to shipping costs more quickly than many other cost pressures, said Oliver Miloszewski of risk consultancy firm Aon. Individual product impact may appear incremental, but the cumulative effect of higher shipping costs can ripple across supply chains and ultimately influence consumer prices across a broad range of sectors, he said. Singaporean consumers are also feeling the pinch in other ways as local ferries increase fares and luxury cruise liners tack on fuel surcharges. Ship operators face limited options. Shippers have limited choices to deal with the situation, Miloszewski said. They can pay more for fuel or implement fuel-saving measures, like slowing shipping or suspending voyages. The average speed of bulk carriers and container ships has slowed globally by around 2% since the war began on February 28, industry group Clarkson's research reported. High prices are also driving more interest in green fuels, said Hakan Agneval of marine and energy technology manufacturer Wärtsilä. The good news is the technology to create lower emitting fuels exists, he said. The bad news is production isn't yet at scale and greener fuels are often more expensive. Though U.S. President Donald Trump derailed efforts to shift global shipping away from fossil fuels in 2025, Agneval said the current conflict could prompt strategically minded companies and countries to renew their push toward greener alternatives. Rising fossil fuel prices are narrowing the cost gap. That improves the business case for green fuels, he said. The Caravel Group owns one of the world's largest ship management companies, Fleet Management Limited, which oversees more than 120 shipbuilding projects. About a third of ships that the company is managing the construction of will be dual fuel capable, meaning they can run on both conventional bunker fuel and alternatives such as liquefied natural gas, CEO Angad Banga told the Associated Press. Ship owners are willing to pay a premium to have vessels that can switch between fuels because in a volatile environment, optionality has a measurable economic value, he said. Alternative fuels are not yet as flexible as conventional bunker fuel, Banga said. While there are more than 890 LNG-fueled vessels in operation globally, a lack of supporting infrastructure has created bottlenecks for them. But the industry is catching up, and limits on bunker fuel are driving even more interest in LNG-capable ships, he said. That progress is real. Treasury Department tells U.S. banks to flag suspected Iranian money laundering networks. The Treasury Department wants U.S. banks and other financial institutions to monitor for suspected Iranian money laundering networks that use their funds to smuggle sanctioned oil through shell companies and crypto networks. The move, which effectively deputizes the global financial system to help disrupt Iran's sanctions evasion infrastructure, comes as the U.S. and Iran reached another impasse over how to end their war, while their ceasefire has grown increasingly shaky. President Donald Trump on Monday said the Iran ceasefire is on life support after he rejected Tehran's latest proposal to end the war. The Trump administration is calling on banks to flag certain customers who may launder funds for Iran's Revolutionary Guard, including newly formed companies moving unusually large amounts of money, firms that route payments through multiple intermediaries or transactions connected to Iranian crypto firms, among other indicators. As part of the U.S. initiative to monitor Iranian oil sales, banks are being asked to watch out for oil labeled as Malaysian blend to disguise its Iranian origin, missing or falsified shipping documents, or ship-to-ship oil transfers that obscure where cargo came from. A Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network report released Monday says oil firms linked to Iran conducted roughly $4 billion in transactions in 2024, and dozens of shipping companies based in Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and Hong Kong, all connected to transporting sanctioned Iranian oil, processed about $707 million through U.S. accounts in 2024. Along with the bombing campaign in Iran, the Trump administration has turned toward an economic-focused effort aimed at choking Tehran into submission through sanctions and the threat of secondary sanctions on Iran's allies. In April, Treasury sent a letter to financial institutions in China, Hong Kong, the UAE, and Oman, threatening to levy secondary sanctions for doing business with Iran, and accusing those countries of allowing illicit activities to flow through their financial institutions. Trump says Iran ceasefire is on life support and proposes gas tax pause as Strait stays closed. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday said the Iran ceasefire is on life support after rejecting Tehran's latest proposal, which officials said included some nuclear concessions. Trump also proposed suspending the federal gas tax to help with higher fuel prices caused by the war. The stalled diplomacy and recent exchanges of fire could tip the Middle East conflict back into open warfare and prolong the worldwide energy crisis sparked by the conflict. Iran still has a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz, a vital waterway for global oil and gas shipments, and America is blockading Iranian ports. Asked at the White House if the ceasefire was still in effect, Trump said it's on life support. I would call it the weakest right now after reading that piece of garbage they sent us, Trump added. I didn't even finish reading it. Trump also said he supported a suspension of the federal tax on gasoline, just over 18 cents per gallon, and 24 cents for diesel. Congress, which is controlled by Republicans, would have to approve. The tax brings in more than $23 billion each year. His pledge came after fuel prices surged past $4.50 a gallon last week. Trump predicted that the price of oil and gas would drop like a rock as soon as hostilities are over. The two sides remain far apart. Trump has demanded a major rollback of Iran's nuclear activities, while Iran is pushing for a more limited agreement that would reopen the strait and lift the blockade ahead of further negotiations. On Monday, Trump claimed that Iran had said it would allow the U.S. to come in and help extract its highly enriched uranium, but went back on that in its latest ceasefire proposal. They changed their mind because they didn't put it in the paper, he said. Iran has not publicly agreed to give up its uranium, saying it has a right to enrich and that its nuclear program is entirely peaceful. Two regional officials told the Associated Press that Iran has offered to dilute part of its highly enriched uranium and transport the rest to a third country. Russia has previously offered to take it. The official spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the sensitive diplomacy. Trump is expected to use a trip this week to China to urge President Xi Jinping to pressure Iran. Beijing is the biggest buyer of Iran's sanctioned crude oil, giving it leverage. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who launched the war with Trump on February 28th, has also demanded that all of Iran's highly enriched uranium be removed from the country. He told CBS's 60 Minutes in an interview that aired Sunday that if that can't be accomplished with negotiations, Israel and the U.S. agree we can re-engage them militarily. Iran's proposal included far-reaching demands. Iran's proposal asked that the U.S. recognize its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, formalizing its control over the international waterway. Iran has effectively closed the strait since the start of the war, only allowing a small number of ships to pass and charging tolls. But experts say such an arrangement would likely violate international law that provides for freedom of navigation. That proposal is also likely to be widely rejected by the international community. The strait was open to international traffic before the war. Iran is also demanding war reparations from the U.S., the lifting of international sanctions, the unfreezing of Iranian assets held abroad, and an end to the war between Israel and Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah, according to Iranian state TV. Israel and Hezbollah have continued to exchange blows, mainly in southern Lebanon, since a nominal ceasefire took hold last month. We did not demand any concessions. The only thing we demanded was Iran's legitimate rights, Iranian Foreign Ministry's spokesman Esmail Baghaei said Monday. The American side still insists on its one-sided views and unreasonable demands. Pakistan still trying to negotiate a deal. Two regional diplomats familiar with the ongoing talks said that Pakistan was continuing its efforts to broker a compromise. One of the diplomats said Pakistan was trying to arrange a memorandum of understanding aimed at ending the war and paving the way for a broader dialogue on issues where the two sides remain divided. Pakistan had hoped to help finalize the memorandum last week, but the effort did not materialize, and mediators are still working on various proposals, the diplomat said. The diplomat, speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss the behind-the-scenes diplomacy, added that Islamabad is receiving support from other regional countries in its peace efforts. Iran keeps up its executions. Meanwhile, Iran executed another man it accused of spying for both the CIA and Israel's Mossad intelligence service. Iran's state-run IRNA news agency said Irfan Shakur-Zada had worked on satellite communications and relayed classified information to those intelligence services. Iran has carried out a string of executions since nationwide protests swept the country in January. Activist groups have long accused Iran of carrying out closed-door trials during which defendants are unable to fully defend themselves. Iran's judiciary chief has repeatedly said that Tehran would increase the speed with which it carried out hangings to fight back against its enemies at home and abroad. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Trump FDA chief is leaving after angering pharma CEOs, vaping lobbyists, and anti-abortion groups. The head of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Marty Makary, is resigning after a rocky tenure that drew months of complaints from health industry executives, anti-abortion activists, vaping lobbyists, and other allies of President Donald Trump. He steps down after just over a year leading the powerful health regulatory agency. A surgeon and health researcher, Makary came to prominence among Republicans as an outspoken critic of COVID-19 health measures during the pandemic when he frequently appeared on Fox News Channel. But he struggled to manage the FDA's bureaucracy and failed to win the confidence of its staff after mass layoffs, leadership changes, and a series of controversies in which the agency's scientific principles appeared to be overridden by political interests, including those of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's a great doctor, and he was having some difficulty, Trump told reporters outside the White House on Tuesday. But he's going to go on, and he's going to do well. Kyle Diamandis, the agency's chief for foods, is expected to take over as acting commissioner. Diamandis is an attorney with personal ties to Donald Trump Jr. The FDA commissioner, as the leader of an agency that regulates billions of dollars in consumer goods and medicines, is often required to juggle competing priorities that straddle science and politics. Makary faced a unique challenge in balancing calls by Trump and other Republicans to cut red tape at the FDA, while also tending to Kennedy's interest in scrutinizing of the safety vaccines, drugs, and food additives. Virtually all of FDA's senior career officials resigned, retired, or were forced out in the first year of the second-term Trump administration, leading to a steady stream of leaks and negative stories in the media cataloging low morale, dysfunction, and frustration among staff. Makary's handpicked deputy, Dr. Vinay Prasad, was pushed out of the agency twice in less than a year for running afoul of specialty drug makers and groups for patients with rare diseases. Makary appeared poised to weather the controversy, despite an ongoing pressure campaign calling on Trump to fire him. Recent months brought fresh criticisms from other interest groups that the White House considers key to Republican chances in November elections. anti-abortion groups have criticized Macri for allegedly slow-walking an internal review of the abortion pill mifepristone, which has been on the market for 25 years but remains a target for conservative activists. Vaping executives told Trump that Macri was blocking approval of their products, including new flavored e-cigarettes seen as crucial to the industry's survival. Last week, the agency abruptly changed course on vaping, authorizing the first fruit-flavored products and issuing guidelines that loosened marketing for major manufacturers. But it wasn't enough to keep Macri in the job. A permanent replacement for FDA commissioner will need to be nominated by Trump and confirmed by majority vote in the Senate. Faster drug reviews are overshadowed. As a former regular on Fox News, Macri was aggressive about promoting his accomplishments on cable television and podcasts and in online opinion pieces. More than half a dozen initiatives from Macri aimed to speed up or streamline FDA drug reviews, including dropping certain study requirements, incorporating artificial intelligence into drug evaluations, and offering expedited reviews to medicines that support national interests. But pharmaceutical executives rely on the predictability and consistency of FDA decisions, even more than speedy reviews. Macri's efforts on drug reviews were overshadowed by internal conflicts and upheavals that created headaches for drug makers, investors, and patients. A number of specialty drug makers studying therapies for rare or hard-to-treat diseases said they received rejection letters or requests to run additional studies for drugs that had previously been given the go-ahead by FDA staff. Those drugs were primarily overseen by Prasad, who stepped down for a second time from his role as FDA's vaccine and biotech chief in April. Vaccine moves denounced. Prasad repeatedly overruled vaccine staffers to restrict eligibility for new COVID shots. In February, Prasad initially refused to even consider Moderna's mRNA shot for flu. The FDA was forced to reverse itself after Moderna pledged to formally challenge the decision and called for intervention by the White House. Some of Macri and Prasad's most controversial vaccine proposals never came to fruition, despite stoking confusion and anxiety within the FDA and beyond. In an internal memo in November, Prasad claimed, without publishing evidence, that the FDA had linked COVID shots to the deaths of 10 children. Prasad used that to justify a planned wholesale overhaul of the agency's approach to approving and updating vaccines. A dozen former FDA commissioners issued a scathing denunciation of the plan, warning it would undermine the public interest and decimate vaccine development. The FDA has not released its analysis of the deaths or its plan for the vaccine overhaul. FDA's Drug Center had a revolving door. In the FDA's Drug Center, which is the agency's largest division, Macri oversaw a revolving door of leadership changes. 6 people served as director over the course of 1 year. Macri's initial pick for the job, Dr. George Tidmarsh, was forced to resign after allegations that he used his FDA position to pursue a personal vendetta against a former business partner. His replacement, longtime FDA cancer specialist Dr. Ritz Pazdur, announced he would retire after just 3 weeks on the job, after clashing with Macri on multiple issues involving drug reviews. With Macri's departure, the fate of many fledgling initiatives is uncertain. Most of the programs Macri introduced have not gone through federal rulemaking required to enshrine them in U.S. regulations and could easily be overturned by his successors. Democrats in Congress have questioned the legality of some of those efforts, including a program that offers drug makers expedited reviews for innovative medicines. Trump's proposed Golden Dome, estimated to cost $1.2 trillion, far more than he initially said. President Donald Trump's plan to put weapons in space, pitched as a Golden Dome for America missile defense program, is estimated to cost $1.2 trillion over a 20-year period, according to a new analysis from the Congressional Budget Office, a far heftier sum than the initial $175 billion price tag he gave last year. The nonpartisan CBO report, published Tuesday, is described as an analysis that reflects one illustrative approach rather than an estimate of a specific administration proposal. The futuristic system was ordered by Trump in an executive order during his first week in office. He said then that he expected the system to be fully operational before the end of my term, which wraps up in January 2029. Over the past 40 years, rather than lessening the threat from next-generation strategic weapons, has become more intense and complex with the development by peer and near-peer adversaries of next-generation delivery systems, Trump said in his executive order, justifying the need for the missile defense system. The CBO's estimates are in part based on a lack of details from the Defense Department about what and how many systems will be deployed, making it impossible to estimate the long-term cost of the Golden Dome system, the report says. The concept for the missile system is at least partly inspired by Israel's multi-tiered defenses, often collectively referred to as the Iron Dome, which played a key role in defending it from rocket and missile fire from Iran and allied militant groups as it prosecutes the war on Iran alongside the U.S. The U.S. Golden Dome is envisioned to include ground and space capabilities able to detect, intercept, and stop missiles at all major stages of a potential attack. Congress has already approved roughly $24 billion for the Missile Defense Initiative through Republicans' massive tax and spending measure signed into law last summer. Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat Oregon, who requested the estimate from the CBO, said in response to the report that the missile defense project is nothing more than massive giveaway to defense contractors paid for entirely by working Americans. Last May, the president said the Golden Dome would cost $175 billion. The CBO last year estimated that just the space-based components of the Golden Dome could cost as much as $542 billion over the next 20 years. Ship operator and employee are charged in a crash that caused the deadly collapse of Baltimore Bridge. Federal prosecutors announced criminal charges Tuesday in the 2024 collapse of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge, accusing a Singapore-based ship operator and a senior employee of making critical decisions that caused the vessel to crash into the span, killing 6 people and covering up what happened. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche called it a preventable tragedy of enormous consequence. The indictment names Synergy Marine Pte. Limited, based in Singapore, and Synergy Maritime Pte. Limited, based in Chennai, India, Radhakrishnan Kartik Nair, 47, an Indian national who was technical superintendent for the Dali container ship, was also charged. Synergy Marine expressed disappointment and accused the U.S. Justice Department of turning an accident into a crime. This was a maritime casualty that should be assessed through the full factual, technical, and regulatory record, rather than through selective mischaracterizations in a criminal indictment. Synergy will vigorously defend itself against these inaccurate allegations, the company said. The Dali, bound for Sri Lanka, lost power twice in a 4-minute span as it moved to sea from the port of Baltimore, causing it to crash into the Key Bridge on March 24, 2024. Investigators say a loose wire in a switchboard likely caused the first power loss that caused its steering to fail. After regaining power, the ship found itself in trouble again. The Dolly turned to a certain pump to supply fuel to 2 generators, but the pump was not designed to automatically restart after the first blackout, so a second blackout occurred, the indictment says. The ship crashed into a supporting column of the bridge at about 1:30 a.m. If the Dolly had used the proper fuel pumps according to the indictment, the vessel would have regained power in time to safely get onto the bridge. It crashed instead, killing 6 construction workers who had been filling potholes. As alleged, the bridge was struck and collapsed because those who were responsible for the ship's operation deliberately cut corners at the expense of safety, said Jimmy Paul, head of the FBI's Baltimore office. The companies and Nair are charged with conspiracy, willfully failing to immediately inform the U.S. Coast Guard of a known hazardous condition, obstructing an investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, and making false statements. The Synergy companies are also charged with misdemeanors for the release of pollutants into the Patapsco River, including shipping containers and their contents. The FBI's investigation focused on the vessel's operations and whether the crew knew of critical systems issues before leaving port. The NTSB found that the 2 electrical blackouts disabled the controls of the huge cargo ship before it crashed into the bridge. The ship had experienced 2 blackouts in port a day earlier, but Synergy didn't investigate or report those as required and provided false information to the NTSB, the government alleges. Maryland officials estimate it could cost between $4.3 billion and $5.2 billion to replace the bridge, which is expected to be open to traffic in late 2030. The altered skyline is a constant reminder of this tragedy, Paul said. But the true cost of the collapse was far greater, according to the Maryland Attorney General's office. It halted shipping at the port of Baltimore, disrupted the livelihoods of thousands, rerouted road traffic through communities already bearing disproportionate burdens, and triggered economic problems statewide. The indictment comes on the heels of a settlement in principle between the state of Maryland, Synergy Marine, and Grace Ocean Private Limited, the Singapore-based ship owner, Attorney General Anthony Brown announced in April. That lawsuit alleged the crash was the result of negligence, mismanagement, and the reckless operation of a vessel that was not seaworthy and should never have left port. Plaintiffs include the families of the 6 construction workers who died, owners of cargo that was on the ship, and local governments seeking damages for economic losses. The details of the settlement haven't been disclosed, and some portions of the lawsuit remain unresolved. The state sought damages on behalf of its agencies for the destruction of the bridge, harm to the Patapsco River and surrounding environment, lost revenues, and economic losses to Maryland and its residents. The settlement does not resolve any claims the state has against the shipbuilder, Hyundai, the Attorney General's office said in April. The bridge, a long-standing Baltimore landmark, was a vital piece of transportation infrastructure that allowed drivers to easily bypass downtown. The original 1.6-mile steel span took 5 years to build and opened to traffic in 1977. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Hegseth faces bipartisan grilling about weapons drawdown during the Iran war. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faced tough questions Tuesday from Republican and Democratic lawmakers about the Trump administration's endgame for the Iran war, the conflict's rising $29 billion cost, and its impact on diminishing U.S. weapons stockpiles. While the Pentagon chief softened his tone from hearings before Congress nearly 2 weeks ago, notably avoiding the same pointed criticism of lawmakers, he got far more pushback from members of his own Republican Party about the levels of U.S. munitions used in the Iran war and President Donald Trump's intense criticism of traditional allies for not taking part in the conflict. I take issue with the characterization that munitions are depleted in a public forum, Hegseth said. That's not true. Even as he insisted that the U.S. military has plenty of missile defense systems and other munitions for the Iran war or future conflicts, Hegseth told House and Senate lawmakers overseeing defense spending that the Trump administration is working to ramp up production of weapons. Pentagon officials also told lawmakers that the cost of the Iran war has risen to about $29 billion, the vast bulk of which, roughly $24 billion, is related to replacing munitions and repairing equipment, but also includes operational costs to keep forces deployed. That is up from the overall total of $25 billion that Pentagon Comptroller Jay Hurst revealed nearly 2 weeks ago. He said the updated estimate does not include the cost to repair or rebuild U.S. military sites damaged in the region. Republicans tout the importance of American allies. Hegseth faced notable pushback from Republicans on the Trump administration's straining of relations with longtime allies, with Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell telling Hegseth that NATO is the most important military alliance in world history. It seems to me that a lot of the European countries think that we're reducing our influence there. They're sort of on their own, said McConnell, the GOP chairman of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. Trump has assailed NATO allies and others for not helping reopen Strait of Hormuz, a vital global shipping corridor, or otherwise offering more support, saying he plans to pull thousands of troops out of Germany in the coming months. Oklahoma Representative Tom Cole, the Republican chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, voiced his concerns in a separate hearing, saying that America First has never meant America alone. We have a plan to escalate if necessary, Hegseth said. We have a plan to retrograde if necessary. We have a plan to shift assets. He said he would not reveal any next steps publicly, noting repeated questions from lawmakers over weapons stockpiles. Hegseth said the concerns have been unhelpfully overstated and that we have plenty of what we need. He said the defense industry has been told to build more and build faster, blaming the military-industrial base's inadequate capacity on previous administrations and U.S. aid to Ukraine in its war with Russia. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has painted an alarming picture of U.S. stockpiles of munitions, including interceptors that can defend against incoming enemy missiles on land and sea. The think tank said in an April analysis that American forces expended more than half of the pre-war inventory on 4 key weapon systems, and that rebuilding to adequate levels for a possible war with China will take additional time. Trump administration faces pressure from the economic impact of the Iran war. Trump is facing increasing pressure from the economic shocks of Iran effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil normally flows. The U.S. military, in turn, has blockaded Iranian ports, and the two sides have traded fire, with American forces thwarting attacks on their warships and disabling Tehran-linked oil tankers. Republican Senator Susan Collins, chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, questioned whether the Trump administration anticipated Iran's closure of the strait, which has surged gasoline prices. General Dan Keane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said the president is briefed with carefully considered military options. It seems to me that there's been a different plan almost daily with dealing with this problem, which is why I asked, said Collins, who joined Democrats last month in a failed vote to halt the conflict and is facing a tough re-election fight. Democrats in both hearings repeatedly questioned what the cost of the war would be, from repairing damaged military installations in the Middle East to the rising fuel prices. You're spending families' hard-earned tax dollars on a war that many strongly oppose, and you're forcing people to pay more at the pump, said Senator Patty Murray, a Democrat from Washington State. And yet, you're not even providing a real breakdown for the cost of this war. Hegseth responded rhetorically, "What is the cost of Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon?" And the fact that this president has been willing to make a historic and courageous choice to confront that, and it comes with cost, and we recognize that. Delaware Senator Chris Coons, the ranking Democrat on the Senate subcommittee, repeatedly asked how the Trump administration will reopen the strait to commercial shipping. If we control it, how do we reopen it? Coons pressed Hegseth in a tense exchange. Hegseth responded defensively, saying the senator was being disingenuous and ignoring the incredible battlefield successes. Coons shot back that he was worried that you've achieved a series of tactical successes, but are on the verge of a strategic loss. Musk, Cook, and other prominent U.S. executives invited to join Trump on trip to China. Prominent U.S. executives, from big tech to agriculture, have been invited to join President Donald Trump on his trip to China this week, according to a White House official. Trump leaves on Tuesday for Beijing to meet with President Xi Jinping. Aside from discussions about Iran, the two leaders are expected to discuss trade and artificial intelligence. Here's a look at some of the executives, according to the White House official, who is not authorized to comment publicly and speak on the condition of anonymity. Elon Musk. Musk, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, led Trump's Department of Government Efficiency until leaving in the spring of 2025, before the controversial pop-up agency was shuttered in November. The billionaire, who also owns the social media platform X, feuded with Trump last summer in a war of words that included Musk claiming without evidence that the government was concealing information about the president's association with infamous pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Musk eventually said that he regretted some of his posts on X about Trump. Since then, Musk has refocused his energy on Tesla and his other companies. Tesla has operations in China, and Musk has visited there. He's also been dealing with French prosecutors seeking charges against him and X for child sexual abuse images on the platform, deepfakes, disinformation, and complicity in denying crimes against humanity by the platform's artificial intelligence system Grok. There's also trial pitting Musk against OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. Tim Cook. Cook remains busy as his tenure at Apple winds down. The CEO announced last month that his 15-year reign as the head of the technology company will come to an end on September 1st, when he returns the CEO duties over to Apple's head of hardware engineering, John Ternus. During Cook's years as the top executive, Apple saw that its market value soar by more than $3.6 trillion during an iPhone-fueled era of prosperity. Cook will remain with the company as executive chairman. Apple's reliance on overseas manufacturing required Cook to master the art of political diplomacy, particularly while Trump waged trade wars with China during both his terms in the White House. After persuading Trump to exempt the iPhone and other products from Trump's first-term tariffs, he faced a more daunting challenge during the current administration. While insisting that Apple shift its iPhone manufacturing from China to the U.S., Trump imposed some tariffs on the device this time around, but Cook still managed to minimize the fees by shifting the production of iPhones destined for the U.S. market to India, and also winning some exemptions after promising Apple would invest $600 billion in the U.S. during Trump's second administration. Kelly Ortberg. Robert Kelly Ortberg, a former CEO at aerospace manufacturer Rockwell Collins, became CEO of Boeing in 2024. He spent time focusing on Boeing's recovery as the aerospace company was dealing with legal, regulatory, and production problems and mounting financial repercussions when he took over. A year ago, Ortberg said that he didn't expect the U.S. trade war with China to forestall Boeing's financial recovery nor prevent it from reaching aircraft delivery targets with Chinese airlines that were refusing to accept its planes. Beijing increased its import tax on American goods to 125% in April 2025 in retaliation for Trump raising the tariff on products made in China to 145%. China's tariff would more than double the cost of passenger jets that Boeing, the U.S. largest exporter, sells for tens of millions of dollars. But Beijing is less of a threat to Boeing now than it used to be, as it has started to send fewer of its finished planes there over time. Boeing has been in ongoing talks with China over a possible large aircraft sale. Who else is going? BlackRock Chairman and CEO Larry Fink, Blackstone Chairman, CEO, and co-founder Stephen Schwarzman, Cargill Chairman and CEO Brian Sykes, Citi Chairman and CEO Jane Fraser, Coherent CEO Jim Anderson, GE Aerospace Chairman and CEO H. Lawrence Culp, Goldman Sachs Chairman and CEO David Solomon, Illumina CEO Jacob Thaysen, MasterCard CEO Michael Maybach, Meta President and Vice Chairman Dina Powell McCormick, Micron Chairman, President, and CEO Sanjay Mehrotra, Qualcomm President and CEO Cristiano Amon, Visa CEO Ryan McGurney. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Man with an assault rifle sprays rounds at drivers near Boston, wounding 2 before being shot. A man previously convicted of shooting at police strode down a busy road outside Boston, firing an assault-style rifle at passing cars, shooting 2 drivers and sending others scrambling until he was wounded when a state trooper and a former Marine opened fire, authorities said. As bullets tore through at least a dozen cars, including a state police cruiser, panicked motorists abandoned their vehicles or hid under them for cover, according to prosecutors and state police. Authorities said the gunman fired more than 60 rounds during the Monday afternoon attack, in which 2 victims suffered life-threatening injuries. The shooting happened on a heavily traveled road along the Charles River in Cambridge, home to Harvard University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Sidewalks and riverside paths in the area are often crowded with pedestrians, joggers, and cyclists. While people were jumping from their cars, scattering in various directions, both that trooper and that civilian, rather than going in one direction, went toward the suspects with their weapons to try to end that situation, Middlesex District Attorney Marion Ryan said at a news conference Monday night. The suspect, identified by prosecutors as 46-year-old Tyler Brown of Boston, was shot multiple times in the extremities and is expected to face charges including 2 counts of armed assault with intent to murder and other gun offenses. What happened today cannot stand, the district attorney said. In 2020, Brown was arrested after firing several rounds at Boston police officers, according to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. Prosecutors at the time said he should serve at least 10 years in prison due to the level of brazen violence and because he was on probation for a 2014 conviction on assault and witness intimidation charges. Suffolk Superior Court Judge Janet Sanders instead ordered Brown to serve 5 to 6 years in state prison and 3 years of probation with credit for the nearly 18 months he'd spent in custody. At the time, the judge's decision sparked outrage and criticism among local officials, concerned that violent offenders weren't being held accountable. Those same concerns returned after Monday's shooting. "Talk about a ball drop," said the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association in a statement posted on social media. The fact that the judicial system thought it was prudent to show leniency to a wannabe cop killer 5 years ago is not only the definition of insanity, but an undeniable insult to those who put their lives on the line every day. Rachel Savriano said she was trapped in her car Monday as other vehicles tried to make U-turns in front of her when she saw Brown walking toward her waving his gun. The man authorities later identified as a former Marine helped her escape, she told the Boston Globe. "I didn't know what to do. It doesn't feel like you should get out of the car when there is a shooter coming toward you. But there was a man next to me," she said. "He opened my car door, pulled me out, and told me to run. He made a barricade with the door, and I just started running." Severiano said she saw the man shooting at Brown before she ran into a nearby hotel. "He is an incredible hero," she said. "He was so calm, and he didn't hesitate." Ryan said investigators found no connection between Brown and the people targeted in the shooting. She renewed her call for harsher penalties on people who fire weapons without regard for the risk of serious injury. Brown was not medically ready to go to court for an arraignment, the Cambridge District Court said Tuesday. The Committee for Public Counsel Services has been appointed to defend him, and a message seeking comment was left with the agency on Tuesday. A message was also left at a phone number listed for Brown and a potential family member, while another possible relative said they didn't know him. Ukrainian drone pilots turn a military exercise in Sweden into a critical warning for NATO. The war game scenario was this: one of NATO's newest members, Sweden, was under threat by an unnamed country that was building up troops alongside the military alliance's eastern border. And in an unusual twist, non-NATO member Ukraine was there to advise on drone warfare and delivered a critical warning to the alliance. The Associated Press was allowed to witness the Swedish-led military exercise this week as Europe faces not only the threat of Russia, but the wavering of NATO's most powerful member, the United States. The war game that also involved U.S. forces played out with a real threat in mind. For months, Russia has ramped up sabotage, including cyber attacks against critical infrastructure and disinformation against countries across Europe, as detailed by an AP investigation. The wargame scenario, with the Swedish island of Gotland in theory facing power outages and food shortages because of sabotage, tested what NATO members might do before NATO's Collective Defense Clause, Article 5, has been invoked. "In theory, it could happen tomorrow," said Rear Admiral Jonas Wikström, director of the exercise. Europe considers Trump's volatile approach to NATO. Sweden's Chief of Defense, General Michael Claesson, noted that the U.S. is Europe's most militarily capable ally, so any change in the American presence affects the overall dynamics. He told the AP that announcements by U.S. President Donald Trump of troop reductions in Europe are interpreted as the Americans are leaving, and they are not. Europe's military leaders, however, are watching closely how Trump and his administration treat NATO, which Trump has described as a paper tiger. Most recently, he has ordered the withdrawal of at least 5,000 U.S. troops from Germany and threatens to remove more. Trump also has criticized allies and NATO for not coming to the aid of the U.S. in the Iran war, while U.S. air defense systems and missiles have been moved toward the Middle East from Europe, raising concerns about gaps in protection. Some European nations have been told they will face delays to their orders of U.S. weapons. Claesson denied that recent announcements, including plans for a hybrid navy between a group of Nordic and Baltic nations, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, as announced by General Sir Gwyn Jenkins, the UK's first Sea Lord, or a hedge against a possible future where the US does not come to the aid of NATO allies. But he said everything that offers European allies freedom of action is good. The UK and Norway also aim to build a combined frigate fleet, said Marte Herhartsen, State Secretary at the Norwegian Ministry of Defense. Ukrainian drone forces destroy Swedish troops in exercise. Since Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he also has paused intelligence sharing with Ukraine and at times aligned with Moscow in negotiations to end the war. In the war game scenario this week, Ukrainian forces had a chance to demonstrate what they have learned on the battlefield and why their country might be a worthy NATO member. A group of Ukrainian drone pilots, invited to teach Western forces how to win at drone warfare, destroyed Sweden's troops in an exercise where the Ukrainians played the role of the aggressor, a 25-year-old drone pilot told AP. They stopped the training 3 times for troops to work out what to do better. But if it were real life, they would have been dead, he said, giving his call sign Tariq in line with Ukrainian military regulations. Swedish troops have potential but need to improve their drones and tactics, and commanders need a deeper understanding of drone warfare, said another pilot with the call sign Karet. He described flying small first-person view attack drones on the front line against Russian forces. Sometimes drone pilots are supported by reconnaissance drone teams, but other times they are working blindly. Western forces cannot understand what it is like, he added. You need to see this with your own eyes. All Western forces need to learn rapidly how to perform drone and counter-drone operations, and the fastest way is to listen to the Ukrainians, Clayson said. What they've taught us is you have to really focus on your survivability and how you can't be detected, said Brigadier General Curtis King with the U.S. military. At the same time, he said, Western nations need to focus on deep detection capabilities to spot drones from far away. Such knowledge is desperately needed along Russia's border with NATO, where there has been a spate of drone incursions in recent months, including from Ukrainian drones, sent off course by Russian jamming. The goal is to have systems that work together so that radar made by different companies in different countries can be integrated to share data and track threats, King said. That process has started, but we're not there yet. Putin could use Gotland to test the alliance. The war game focused on the Swedish island of Gotland because it is strategically located in the Baltic Sea between the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, where Moscow has stationed missiles, and Sweden. If you control Gotland, you pretty much control the central part of the Baltic Sea, Klassen said. The Baltic Sea is a financial lifeline for Russia, as vessels with its shadow fleet carry oil and liquefied natural gas that Moscow uses to fund its war in Ukraine. After the Cold War, Sweden effectively abandoned its military presence on Gotland, but Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 prompted a rethink and a strengthened military presence there, and Sweden, along with Finland, decided to join NATO in 2024. A very reasonable scenario is that Russian President Vladimir Putin could use Gotland to test NATO by trying to take a thin sliver of alliance territory to probe the collective reaction, Clayson said. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 12th issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Brian. Thank you for listening.